My fellow Americans, not long ago I received a letter from a woman in the Midwest. She wrote, "Dear Mr. President, in my humble way I am writing to you about the crisis in Vietnam. I have a son who is now in Vietnam. My husband served in World War II. Our country was at war. But now, this time, it's just something that I don't understand. Why?"
For more than 15 years, the United States fought what is known as the Vietnam War. The war raged through areas of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia between the years of 1961 and 1965. Throughout the course of the conflict, thousands of U.S. soldiers were captured and became known as prisoners of war, or POWs, and others were listed as missing in action, or MIA. An accurate count of POWs or MIAs was never had by the United States. Many of these were airmen who were shot down over North Vietnam or Laos. The United States relied heavily on Vietnamese newspapers to see who had been captured, but never knew the complete truth of these reports. Today, more than 1,600 American soldiers still remain unaccounted for.
When I first became aware of the war, it was on the television. It was black and white in those days. And you would watch Walter Cronkite on the news, and the first thing you'd see is a report from Vietnam. A lot of shooting back and forth, and a voiceover of Walter Cronkite telling you of the day's events. As time went on, we would see it in color, and you would see more. You'd begin to see death tolls. There wasn't a lot of political talk in our home. My mom and dad didn't really discuss it very much, but it was always on, and it loomed over us in our generation because alongside of that was the Flower Children and the being free and all the rock concerts and all the things that was happening, and that was my generation and all the things I was interested in. We go to high school and kids were having their brothers go off to the war and brothers getting killed, and so I was much more aware of what was going on than I think maybe my parents for that generation. We went to the Presbyterian Church and the Episcopal Church in the 60s, and there wasn't anything at all ever really mentioned about it. I don't even remember it being mentioned in a prayer. It started out front page, bottom page, and then went to second page. But I think enough of friends of ours and kids were being called up with the lottery system and being called up and going that you had a number. I remember being in high school and my boyfriend had a number and his number was 21. So he was going to get called. It was in a teen magazine that I was reading, and they had these bracelets in the background on one of the back pages. And I was with my girlfriend Luann, and we're like, "Hey, look at this." And we had to know what's a POW. We didn't know what that was. And so we looked that up and went, wow, that's something we can do. And that kind of stemmed from being in middle school. I think it was 8th grade, and you became a little bit more aware. You were thinking more outside of yourself than inside. And I think that teachers were starting to talk a little bit more about this war's gone on long enough. What can we do here at home? That's when teachers ask those questions. So that's when we sent away for the bracelet. Sent away for it, and then the bracelet came in a little plastic envelope thing, and a couple of weeks later, and she got her bracelet and I got mine, and we put them on.
So when the bracelet arrived, what were your feelings as it came?
Well, I looked at it and I was like, wow, he was missing in 1966, and I didn't know anything about him at all. Marshall Capina. And I just put the bracelet on and wore it. I mean, it's all really scratched up, and I wore it every day for 15 years straight. Never took it off. Wore it to proms, wore it. I was entered the Miss America pageant through a local pageant, wore it then, wore it all the time. Never thought of taking it off. It was just part of who I was. I got to greet one of the first POWs that returned from Monmouth County. It was just a real honor for me. And I showed him that I was wearing the bracelet and how it was special, really special. And I always wanted to know, how can I find out more information? We didn't have the internet. There was no background information on him, no picture, didn't know where he came from, nothing. I just had this name.
How many kids at school were wearing those bracelets then?
You know, I don't remember, but there was a small group of people. This was, from what I remember, just a way for us to not forget who's either missing in action or a POW. There was no way to find out except to watch the TV, you know, in the middle 70s, to see if you heard his name, saw it in the newspaper, or saw it scroll by on the television.
Did you ever think you had missed the name?
Of course. Oh, of course. But I would scour every day. You know, every time that it was being in the newspaper, I'd always look just to see if I could find Capina anywhere.
The bracelet comes in the mail. You put it on. You wear it for 15 years. The war ends. Eventually, those scrolling names on the TV quit scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still wearing the bracelet at that point?
I am, because it's I wore it up to 1979, and I continued to wear it. And then I was pregnant and expecting my first child, Jeremy, and it just seemed a time to take it off. And I took it off and I placed it in my jewelry box where it's been all these years. Yeah, and I have the same jewelry box, of course. Then it was my mother's jewelry box, and I placed it in a really special little cubby and just put it right there. There it is. I see it. I see it every day. Almost 20 years go by. We got a computer, and one day I just decided to enter in his name. And he had relatives with the Capina name in Michigan, and that was the only place I could find them in the whole country. In June 1st, 1998, I read in the paper that the Vietnam Memorial Wall was coming to Riverside, California, the moving wall. And I said, let's go up to Riverside. And we went over to the wall and we looked up to see if his name was there. And it was. And it was very emotional to stand there. I mean, we searched through, there was a thing you could leaf through to see which panel any name might be. And I remember just seeing that name and I'm, oh my gosh, he's here. He really is here. And it made it real. And we went over to the wall. We have photographs of me. I don't know anybody else's name. This is the only one that I know.
And you wore his name on your wrist for 15 years.
Right. And he's just always been close to my heart. I came home that night and looked back on the internet and found an address for a Gladys Capina who lived in Michigan, and I wrote her a very detailed letter. I wanted his family to know that he did not die in vain, that I wanted to thank him for serving our country, for protecting me so that I could have children, and I wanted them to know that somebody still thought about him and loved him. June 1st, 1998. Dear Miss Capina, I am writing to you in hopes that you are a relative of Marshall Capina. My interest lies in the fact that I have a bracelet with his name on it and have had this bracelet for over 30 years. I was given the information of his birthday, and the day on my bracelet of July 14th, 1966 corresponded to the records of his passing. I was deeply saddened to know that he was only 21 years old. I found where in the country he had come from, and so looked on the internet and found this address. If this is read by a relative, I would very much appreciate to have a picture of him and to let you know that a day has not gone by for me to think of Marshall. I got the bracelet at the age of 13 and never knew how young he was. I have taken the time over the years to tell my children of the personal sacrifice many American families have made. I thought that you would want to know someone else has thought of him, even though not knowing him. I got a letter back from her a number of weeks later, and this Gladys was an actual aunt of his, and she shared with me that he had been left on a doorstep of a relative when he was just a newborn, that his mother could not take care of him for her own personal reasons, and she lived in another town about 15 miles away, and so he was raised by relatives. And when he was 18, he joined the military and went to Vietnam and had served there for a little while, and then he passed. What a neat thing that was to have connected with them. You know, I just think of my own children, you know, being away, serving missions, doing whatever, and how wonderful it is to hear from someone who has cared for them. This is his photograph. I think the bracelet changed my view on the war because it made it very personal for me. I carried on my wrist the name of a person who had a family, people who loved him, he loved others, and it made it real for me and selfless, because I didn't have to wear this. I didn't have to think of somebody else. But at an early age, I learned to look outside of myself. And I'm grateful for that. And I hope that I've been able to teach my children that.
If you could have dinner with Master Sergeant Marshall Capino, what do you think? I think that would be.
I think it'd be wonderful. I would want to just know all about what it was like growing up in Michigan. I would want to know his likes and his dislikes, his favorite foods, the colors he liked, the girlfriends he dated, the people he loved, the books he liked to read, what kind of movies did he like, what did he want to be when he grew up. You know, this is a whole person whose life was taken so early. And he had undoubtedly much to offer.